Welcome to the Essence of Liberty podcast. This is the horsemanship podcast where we discuss all things liberty to help you understand, connect, communicate, and play with your horse in a gentle, subtle, and force-free way. We'll get a bit nerdy about equine psychology and learning theory to understand the science behind it all. And we'll also dive into how to motivate your horse, ways to strengthen your relationship, solving those common problems, and how to use liberty as a way to build your horse up physically, mentally, and emotionally, all in half an hour or less. I'm Dr. Nadine Lindblom, former equine veterinarian, and I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey as a student of the horse. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Essence of Liberty podcast. I have been very busy behind the scenes working on a brand new course, as well as upgrading a lot of the content in the Essence of Liberty online academy. And the first module of the academy is all about setting your horse up for success, not just inside the training space when you're actually working with your horse, but starting outside the training space and making sure that your horse has everything he needs in order to succeed within the training space. And as I've been upgrading this content, it's kind of been just highlighting to me how important this truly is and how often this step is skipped in so many different situations, and how we really need to think really deeply about this. Because in Liberty, it is like we're really relying on our horse's desire or our horse's choice to say yes to the things that we're asking them to do. And if they're not saying yes, then the Liberty doesn't really work very well, right? So this type of liberty that we're doing here is very much choice-based, and it's very much based on the horses truly engaging and truly saying yes to our question, rather than sort of making the wrong thing hard or the right thing easy, and working on negative reinforcement-based principles and things like that. Because, I mean, if we were working with negative reinforcement-based principles, then if the horse didn't want to do the thing that we were asking them to do, then we could kind of make the wrong thing difficult until they then decide that the thing that we want them to do is the easier thing. And I'm not saying that there's, those methods are very effective in different types of training concepts, but the type of liberty that I like to teach is a little bit different, and it is more based on the horse really wanting to do the thing that we're asking them to do. And that starts with setting them up to say yes to our question. If they're not set up to say yes to our question, then it's going to be really hard to sort of proceed and progress. And when we talk about setting them up for success, it is really common that we think about the training space itself, but it goes back so much further than that. And this comes back to your horse's nervous system in general. So in order for your horse to be able to want to connect with you, in order for him to get curious, in order for him to get playful, in order for him to be in a really good learning state of mind, his nervous system needs to feel really safe. And the feeling of safety for the nervous system is not just the absence of a threat. Often when we think about the horse feeling safe, we're like, okay, well, there's no threat around him and he's got his herd around him, so he has to feel safe. But the nervous system can become stressed from other things as well. So for example, if the horse is not getting enough nutrition or the right kind of nutrition, if his digestive system is not getting what it needs, and if his microbiome is not healthy, then he is going to be under an element of stress. It may not be a threat kind of stress, but it is a physiological kind of stress where your horse's nervous system and your horse's body is just working in a more of a survival state if he's deficient in different nutrients, or if his digestive system is not working as well as it should. Like that's a very brief example, and we're going to go into a few different concepts when it comes to this. But what I'm trying to highlight here is we need to really think about our horse's lifestyle and how our horses feel outside of the training in order for them to be able to succeed within the training. And I find that this really digging down into this and ensuring that their lifestyle is really good, it's not just good for liberty, right? It is extremely important when it comes to solving behavioral problems. Like I have a lot of clients that come with, geldings, for example, and they're so busy trying to push and bite and nip, and they're so fidgety, and they want to, grab the reins and they want to grab the lead, and they're just very busy all the time. And it's very tempting to be like, okay, well, how do I train him not to do that? How do I train these behaviors away? And honestly, maybe if you just fix his lifestyle, if you just make sure that he has some friends that he can play with, if you make sure he's got movement, he's got space so that he can exert all of that playful energy outside of the training space and outside, like away from you, then that energy is probably not going to be directed towards you when you are around him because he's already expelled all of that energy. So it is much kinder to fix the lifestyle instead of like trying to punish him or trying to sort of fix all these problems when you're in the training space. And I mean, that's a random example. Like those types of behaviors can come from anxiety. It's not necessarily just, the horse having pent up playful energy, but that can be one of the scenarios where the horses behave that way. And suddenly you give them a friend and those behaviors go away. And it was so simple. But we often get caught up in how to train those behaviors away when perhaps there's a much simpler solution behind all of that. So I want to talk a little bit about just the different elements that your horse really needs outside of the training space. And then we're going to dive into a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the effects that we see when your horse does not receive these things. So the common thing that we talk about is that the horse needs forage, freedom, and friends. But it goes so much deeper than that. So let's think about that. So when it comes to friends, when it comes to companionship, it's not quite enough that your horse just has other horses around. Your horse needs to be able to be in a herd with other horses that he can interact with. Having horses in isolation, where they're in individual paddocks, for example, even though they have other horses on the other side, it's a very unnatural way for them to be. Horses have evolved for millions of years as herd animals. Their herd instincts are so incredibly strong that it should be absolutely bare minimum that we provide them with some kind of herd that they can be in. And it's also important that your horse is comfortable in that herd and that it has a very comfortable dynamic. So sometimes horses that haven't been socialized well when they were younger, for example, they can have issues with like bullying other horses. So if your horse is in a herd and he's being bullied by the other herd members, then that's of course not very good for his mental health. So you need to consider whether or not he is very comfortable in that herd and whether he has other horses that he's very comfortable with. And there is always going to be a little bit of pushing each other around and, there's going to be a little bit of pinning their ears and they're going to, bite each other here and there and there's going to be a few arguments, but it should in general be fairly peaceful. It should be quite a peaceful dynamic and the conflict in the herd should be fairly minimal. If there is a lot of conflict all the time, that is a sign that there is probably something wrong. Maybe there is a lack of resources that they feel like they have to fight over. Maybe there's some horses that clash and their space is too small in order for them to get away from each other, so they always end up in these arguments. And you have to really consider that they are in a very balanced and calm and peaceful herd. Because if they're not, then your horse's nervous system is always going to be in a state of survival and he's always going to be on edge and he's not going to be able to relax as well as he should in order to be able to live a very comfortable life. This also comes back to our example of the young geldings. Does your young gelding have other young geldings to play with? It's really, really important because they have this incredible drive to play these like little dominance games where they're pushing each other around and they're biting each other's faces and all of that stuff. It's really important for their development and for them to be able to use all of that playful energy. If they can't do that with each other, then he's probably going to try to do that with you, and us humans don't really appreciate our horses rearing up and trying to bite our face. So we need to make sure that he's got other horses that he's able to do that with. Then when it comes to freedom, it's not necessarily just your horse having some space to move, right? So horses evolved to walk about 16 kilometers per day to the water and to find food. They evolved to move a lot. And in today's world, we often keep horses in quite small pastures. Not always. I mean, there's a lot of horses out there that have a lot of space. But in a lot of places, we keep them in quite small paddocks that don't facilitate this walking. And that leads to horses getting quite overweight, and it leads to them just not moving their bodies as much as they should. And also, what's important to think about, that just because your horse has a fairly big paddock does not necessarily mean that he's moving. So if the paddock doesn't have a lot of forage in it, he's got no reason to walk around. Maybe you have a hay bale or something in a particular corner of the paddock. He's going to spend most of his time around that hay bale eating for most of the day. And if that hay bale is close to the water, then he doesn't have much reason to walk much further. He's just going to go from the hay bale to the water, from the hay bale to the water, and he's not going to be moving a whole lot. Often we give the horses, a fairly big space, and they're not actually moving very much. So just because they have space does not mean that they are moving. So there's a lot of really cool options for this these days that people have come up with, and I really love the concept of track systems. And if you're not familiar with track systems or paddock paradise, then I really encourage you to have a little bit of a Google and have a look at a few different pictures, because it is really, really effective. And it really encourages the horses to move. It encourages the horses to walk over different surfaces and to really use their bodies in the way that they need to for the other 23 hours of the day when you are not actively exercising him or actively doing anything with him. So I am very much for altering the horse's lifestyle and encouraging movement in the horse's general life instead of his exercise being reliant on me. I would much rather him be getting exercise out there than me having to take him in and be like, okay, now we need to really exercise because you have to be fit and you have to get this weight off and you have to do this and that. So often having those types of expectations does not do very much benefit to your relationship or your horse's associations with training if you bring him in and you have to work him really hard in order to make up for the lack of movement that he has in his daily life. So it's really, really effective. And track systems can be used in areas where you don't have a lot of space. And I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's really cool. And I do encourage, like, just a little change, a little track here or there can make a massive difference to how much your horse moves each day. The next concept that we have is forage. And it goes so much deeper than simply your horse having access to forage 24 hours of the day. That's the bare minimum. The horse should have 24/7 access to forage. Horses are not designed to be hungry, and if you leave them in a state of starvation for a period of the day, so for example, he's just getting like 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day and he doesn't have access to anything else in the periods in between, that is really detrimental to his digestive health and his general health. So apart from that, your horse needs to have proper nutrition so that his digestive system stays healthy and so that he's getting all the nutrients that he needs. Because the digestive system is not only for digestion. The digestive system plays a really important role in your horse's immune function, in the balance of the hormones and metabolism, and as well as emotions and behaviors. We all know the feeling of getting a little bit hangry, and horses get that too. And that's because our digestive system is really strongly linked to our emotions and our mental health. I am sure that you have experienced feeling differently depending on what you are eating. And for me, for example, if I eat a lot of processed foods, if I eat a lot of sort of food that's just not good for me, I start feeling really anxious and I start feeling really depressed. And it's because our gut is so affected by this and it influences our emotions and our mental health. And that's the same for the horses. So if they don't have a balanced diet that is really healthy for them and that makes them feel good, then we are going to potentially have a horse that is very easily frustrated or has trouble regulating his emotions. And it's got nothing to do with your training. It's just because of what he's eating. So make sure that you work with a nutritionist. You're working with someone who is very experienced in this area and can help you formulate a really good balanced diet for your horse. And this differs depending on where you are in the world. There are some areas where the soil is really deficient in certain nutrients, which means that you have to supplement those nutrients so that your horse is getting what he needs. So it's really dependent on where you are, what posture your horse has. So make sure that you don't brush over this part and just give him, just like a bland forage, or that you're giving him a lot of sweet feed and all this stuff without really thinking about what your horse truly requires in order to stay healthy and happy. Now, I want to add two more things to this friends, forage, and freedom. And the first one is sleep. Sleep is so incredibly important. Your horse has to be able to lie down on his side and get his REM sleep 1 hour every 24 hours. So, in order for him to feel safe enough to lie down and sleep in that way, he needs to have other horses around him. He needs to feel comfortable in his body so that he knows that he can get up and down easily to run away if he needs to. And if your horse does not get this sleep, and humans too, it really affects your general health, your cognition, your learning, your ability to regulate your emotions, your ability to connect to others around you. Like, some people cope with lack of sleep much better than others. Me personally, I do not. If I don't get my 8 hours of sleep every night, then I just don't function. I become a zombie, and I just don't enjoy life very much. And horses are the same. There are so many sleep-deprived horses out there these days because they don't feel safe to lie down and sleep. And yes, horses do sleep standing up. They can get a lot of sleep standing up, but in order to get their deep REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, they have to lie down. And if they don't feel safe lying down, they don't get that, and they are extremely impacted by that. So if your horse is not learning well, if his metabolism is not good, if he is having trouble regulating his emotions, it could be because he's not sleeping. So you have to just make sure that he is able to sleep, or that he's in an environment where he can sleep. If he's getting a bit older and he's got arthritis, some older horses will stop lying down. So then you need to consider perhaps having them on some painkillers or some type of supplements that's going to help them feel a little bit better so that they can lie down and have a sleep. The fifth thing I want to add, and this is pretty self-explanatory, is of course that they need to be free from pain and disease. So it's not enough that they have forage, freedom, and friends and sleep if they are in pain every single day, or if they are diseased and that is not being managed. So those things need to be managed. I see a lot of horses with horrible feet, for example. The horse's feet are not being well trimmed or getting what those particular feet needs in order to stay comfortable. And the horse is sort of like mildly to moderately lame all the time. And because of that, the nervous system is very busy trying to maintain that pain and trying to and just staying in a state of survival, because pain is a threat in itself. And that's just going to get in the way of everything. And I think it's really, really unfair to get into the training space and expect the horse to be engaged and happy and offering different things and be very connected to you if he is not perfectly comfortable. So those are my 5 things that I want you to think really deeply about. Try not to skip this step. Try not to think, okay, well, my horse has this, that, and that, but how is it, does he really, is he really reaping the benefits from those particular things? So friends, freedom, forage, sleep, and freedom from pain and disease as well. Now, I want to just briefly go over some of the psychological and physical consequences that can come up if these needs are not met. So when it comes to psychological consequences of this, we can end up with horses that are either hyperreactive or hyporeactive in the training and or in their general way of being in general life. And this can become almost as part of we can interpret it as part of their personality, that this is just how the horse is, when really it's just a symptom of a deeper problem. So hyperreactive horses are the type of horses that are generally going to be overreactive, or kind of what we would think as overreactive to sounds and movement. So they're very, very spooky horses. They find it quite difficult to relax after they become stressed. So as soon as they get stressed or triggered, they find it really difficult to get back into a relaxed state and release the tension that they picked up. They might not be able to stand still. They might show signs of biting and pushing and fidgeting, grabbing the reins or the lead rope. They might be tossing their head around, tail swishing, pawing. They're just very agitated in general. And then we have the hyporeactive horses, which can also be horses that are quite shut down. So these are the horses that show like they seem like they don't have any personality, no desire to engage with you or other horses. They can often be labeled as lazy or stubborn. They have no apparent desire to really move, like they have no energy. And they could be explosive as well, kind of like quote unquote out of nowhere. So they act all like completely calm, quote unquote calm, and then suddenly they just explode. They may show a lack of motivation. They may just act depressed in general. And I mean, generally the eyes tell the story. So you have this picture of the lights are on, but nobody is home. So your horse is there, but he's just not present. Some horses will also fluctuate between these hyperreactive responses and hyporeactive shutdown responses. Some horses will go quite quickly between the two states. And both of these horses really struggle to, or I'm sorry, both of these states, horses in either of these states is what I should say, struggle to see you. They struggle to pay attention to you. They might barge through you. They might not respond. You just don't really feel seen in the training session. These horses may also have social behavioral symptoms. So you have horses with separation anxiety or horses that show aggression or bullying towards other horses. You have horses that self-isolate themselves from the herd. That is not normal. Horses that are shy of other horses or don't like being touched either by other horses or by humans. And not being touched, I mean, that's a very kind of general symptom. Like a very, like it doesn't have, like some horses just don't like being touched by other horses. They're not like the type of horse that will mutually groom. So it's not like a massive red flag, but it's something to take note of if they just don't like being touched by other horses. If they don't like being touched by humans, that's another podcast episode. But generally, those are the types of horses that hold a lot of tension, a lot of stored tension in their tissues, and helping them release that tension can sometimes reveal a horse that actually does love being touched. It's just the fact that they either had poor associations or they were holding so much tension in their tissues that touching did not feel comfortable to them. We can also see stereotypical behaviors. We can see weaving, pacing up and down the fence lines, circling, cribbing, windsucking, chewing the wood. We can see repetitive lip and tongue movements, self-mutilation, teeth grinding, or displacement behaviors such as really excessive yawning or licking or scratching or tail swishing and looking away and things like that. And of course, all of these things, all of these psychological impacts of not having their needs met can lead to sleep deprivation. And then you get the signs of a sleep-deprived horse. Moving on to the physical consequences of your horse not having these needs met are that your horse will be at an increased risk of injuries because often these horses are quite stressed and they will injure themselves because they are either running and not really thinking that much about it. They may create, there might be fence injuries because they are trying to interact with horses on the other side of the fence. And they're just, in general, a little bit less resilient, especially if their stress is chronic. We will also see quite poor postures commonly in these types of horses because of the chronic bracing and tension that they are holding. So you'll see braced underneck muscles, you'll see a hollow top line, a very poor core stability or core strength. And I'm not going to go too much into that. That's a different episode, but just a poor posture in general from the stored tension. And this can also result in poor joint health and poor dental health and poor hoof health because you're changing the balance in the horse. The horse is holding so much tension that it's changing the pressure on the joints and like the TMJ joint. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but stored tension, poor posture has downstream effects. Your horse can end up with gastric ulcers and hindgut ulcers as well, especially when it comes to horses being chronically stressed and when they are not getting that 24/7 forage. Horses are producing acid in their stomachs all the time. Us humans will produce acid when we're eating, but horses are constantly producing acid into their stomachs, which means that if they don't have anything to be digesting, then that can really affect the stomach lining. Your horse can become more prone to colic and other digestive issues. He can get food anxiety. He can have problems with weight. He can have obesity. He can have choke. You can end up with reproductive issues if you're trying to breed your horses. You can end up with a depressed immune system, and there's just so much more. I can go on, but this podcast episode is now quite long, so I'm going to cut it off there. I wanted to just go over this and dive deeper into the different concepts of what it really means to provide your horse with all of the things that he needs outside of the training. If you do this, it's going to make a massive difference to his ability to perform and his ability to connect and engage with you inside of the training space. And this should be a bare minimum for us to do first before we even start thinking about training. Generally, the training and the stuff that we do with them, often it's a lot for us, not if we're just teaching them to, be safe and be able to do the things that they need to do in their daily life. But a lot of the stuff after that is more for us and the things that we want to do with them. And we first need to make sure that we're providing them with everything that they need. And then when they are in a state where they can say yes to those questions, only then is it fair to actually ask those questions. So I hope that gives you some food for thought, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.